This has been building for weeks, and it's taken us to the Rose Bowl and a thriller against UCLA. It has taken us through the Fighting Irish and a historic rivalry and a Caleb Williams spectacular against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And now it takes us to Vegas and a Pac-12 championship game. Welcome in everyone to USC Live here at the Voice of College Football and our weekly Monday night 8 o'clock kickoff Pacific time with Matt Zemek. And he's the guy that makes it all work from Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Lincoln Riley's really the guy who makes it all work. Lincoln Riley has put me in this position where, wow, we're on the doorstep of some amazing things at USC in year one. Like, I didn't think we'd be here. And so I have to say, I was more bullish on USC than most. I thought USC would win the Pac-12. I thought USC would be here in the Pac-12 championship game. Thought USC would win 10 games. And I underestimated the team because they've gone 11-1 and they have a chance to make the playoff. And I said before the season, I said all through the summer, the playoffs asking a little too much with the depth issues, with the lack of heft on defense. Here we are. They're close. And I'm definitely not counting this Utah game as a win. I want to get that settled right off the bat. I do think there are some things about this game that set up really well for USC, but when you make Drew Pine look good, when you make Cal's Jack Plummer look good, you cannot take anything to the bank. I'm not overconfident about this game at all. Utah certainly deserves total respect. And obviously we have a Notre Dame game to review, but just kind of at the top of the show, I'm not thinking, oh, USC has this. And we've seen so many Pac-12 teams over the last several years get to this point and then fail. We've seen the team that was one win away from getting into the playoff. You look at Utah in 2019 against Oregon. That Utah team really had a chance to be the number 4 seed in the playoff, and then laid an egg in the Pac-12 championship game against the Justin Herbert, Mario Cristobal Oregon team. So no one at USC is counting their chickens, and no one should be, but just it's still an overachievement in year one under Lincoln Riley just to get to this point. And that's something to keep in mind, that if USC does lose, because USC might win, USC might lose. USC is a 2-point favorite, so Vegas is convinced this is going to be a really close game. Maybe Vegas could be wrong, but that's how where the market is right now. USC could easily lose, and if USC does, this season's not a disappointment. All right, a disappointment would have been falling to 9-3. A disappointment would have been not beating UCLA or Notre Dame. A disappointment would have been falling to the Alamo Bowl. Worst case scenario for USC right now is the Cotton Bowl. And it's either Cotton or a playoff bowl, Peach Fiesta. And so this season, it has already been a rich success. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't really matter what happens on Friday. But this season has been defined as overachievement, and losing to Utah, if it happens, would not change that. This team still would have overachieved clearly to get to this point. And that is just a dose of perspective, and maybe something that enables this USC team to play freely. Now that USC is right next to the playoff, right on the doorstep of it, the guys could think, oh, we could lose this opportunity. We could, this could be taken away from us. And you get nervous and you get tight. But, they played pretty freely against Notre Dame. They played like a team that was seizing an opportunity. We talked about that on last week's show. Just got to continue to think about this in terms of seizing an opportunity, of doing something special, going for it, laying it all on the line. Certainly what Caleb Williams has done, certainly what Austin Jones has done. Just continue to play with that aggressive, positive mentality. Lincoln Riley said on the field to ABC after this game, he said the culture of this team, the culture in the locker room is awesome. That was his word, awesome. And it really is. This team has a great mentality. And when we see the defense's flaws, that where Drew Pine didn't throw an incompletion in the Notre Dame game until the fourth quarter, it's not about lack of effort. It's just about you don't have that high-end talent that you do on the offensive side of the ball. That's really all it is. The effort's been off the charts fantastic. just, so many superlatives about the way this team has comported itself throughout the season, and its one loss was just a gut punch where it fought like heck. But Cam Rising and Dalton Kincaid, whom they'll meet again in Vegas, they've just made so many special plays. And USC also, got a 3rd and 10 stop in the fourth quarter, and hashtag Pac-12 refs said, wait a minute, no, you didn't. So USC could have sulked after that Utah game, could have, lost focus, lost heart. No, not this team. Rallied back, won all the games it was supposed to win, and then rose up against UCLA and Notre Dame. And so here we are, 11-1. Nothing that happens from here on out changes the fact that this 2022 team overachieved. Period. End of sentence. I'm not going to hear arguments to the contrary.
So just to confirm, Matt, you had predicted USC to win the Pac-12 championship prior to the season.
Yes, 10-2 through 12, then get to the Pac-12 title game and beat Utah because I was not high on Bo Nix. Strange, of course, plot twist that really wasn't Bo Nix centric, which took Oregon out of the Pac-12 title game. But nevertheless, 10-2 through 12, winning the Pac-12 championship game. That was my preseason prediction for the Trojans. And so I undersold them.
If we were going to root for our preseason predictions, then I guess I'm going to be rooting for Utah, who I selected as the Pac-12 champion preseason. But we got Utah, we got USC. I got to say, I'm a bit surprised by the line of just 1.5 in USC's favor after taking the Utes to the brink in Rice-Eccles. Since we are going to go back to that Notre Dame victory, which was a number of times teetering on a blowout. And to Notre Dame's credit, they were hanging on by a thread and they were able to just kind of stay in the game. And that first teetering was certainly, boom, you get the ball first, you drive all the way down the field. And the array of offensive concepts that were just integrated into that one drive was pretty impressive. Just a number of concepts that you could see just working throughout the offense and Riley's vision, working itself out onto the field, and boom, they go right through a good Notre Dame defense for the touchdown. They get the turnover and they come right back and they're on the brink of making it 14-0. They get some penalties, some negative plays that pushes them out. Notre Dame was able just to keep distance. The first thing I'd like to bring up, Matt, is obviously we'll go right to the top of the charts, the Heisman trophy candidacy of one Caleb Williams. There was a comment made, I believe, by Kirk Herbstreit likening Caleb Williams to Patrick Mahomes. Now, he's a larger version. He's a big man. But yeah, the way I see it in two different ways. Number one, the arm angles. They can come from whatever direction he needs them to deliver on that particular. And then it's also the way he navigates the pocket, the way he just unconventionally steps up, steps back in the play. We haven't seen too many guys do that, the way that he navigates and shuffles around in the pocket before he chooses to possibly escape the pocket. He's just putting it all together, and he's just obviously a tremendous talent, but he has now put in the work. He's obviously a great student of the game, as we heard discussed during the broadcast as well, and it's just obviously all coming together before our very eyes.
Yeah, obviously I had a ton of work over the weekend. I usually tweet a lot. I have not been tweeting a lot lately because I just had so much stuff to write at Trojans Wire. But I caught like a brief snippet of the Chiefs-Rams game, and Patrick Mahomes was running on like a 3rd and goal play from the 6, and he threw an awful interception in the end zone against the Rams. And, that's the kind of mistake that he made last year in the AFC or last season in the AFC Championship game against the Bengals. And so when I watch Caleb Williams scramble around and spin like a human joystick, you realize like that is kind of like a Mahomes style play that he made against Notre Dame on several occasions. And then you stop and realize he's barely turned the ball over all year. So he has that Mahomes like scrambling ability. And as you said, the 6th sense in the pocket, but he's not turning it over. Often when a riverboat gambler type quarterback, who makes those highlight reel plays the way Patrick Mahomes does, he will throw some bad interceptions at the end of those scramble plays. And Caleb Williams has not done that. He hasn't. And his interceptions this year have not been on scramble type plays. They've just been on, bad reads, just trying to make an overly ambitious throw. And it's happened only, 3-4 times. So the fact that he's so dynamic and he makes these incredibly creative improvisational plays and yet has that turnover count so low, I mean, that is special. That is so special. And when I look at him in a Heisman context, like Marcus Mariota in 2014, not necessarily the similar playing style, but similar in terms of prodigious, prolific offensive numbers and a very low turnover count. I mean, I don't remember the exact TD interception ratio for Mariota.
I'm going to guess 42-4.
It was huge touchdowns and very few interceptions. I mean,
42-4 is in my head.
42-4. Yeah. So setting the bar so high, much as Mariota did. And so he's poised to become the Pac-12's first Heisman winner since Mariota 8 years ago. So, when we talk about Marcus Mariota 2014, not quite Cam Newton 2010 and not quite Joe Burrow 2019, but certainly, one of the especially great Heisman seasons ever. When you're in that company and when you're likened to a guy like Patrick Mahomes, that just tells you right there just how special Caleb Williams is as a sophomore. He just needed 2 years with Lincoln Riley to get this kind of grasp of the game. And obviously he has some things that Lincoln Riley doesn't even teach, like just this natural instinctual ability. But Lincoln Riley is getting the most out of him. And did I think that Caleb Williams would be like this? I mean, I thought he'd commit a few more turnovers. But in terms of the production and in terms of the wow factor, yeah, I actually thought that this is what it was going to be like, because it's not just having the high-end Cadillac talent. It's having the coach with the culture and the scheme and the play design that makes it all happen. The 31-yard completion to Lake McCree early in the game on the first drive. Oh, what play design. I mean, you have your tight end in there as a blocker, and you have all this eye candy with your wide receivers and your running backs. Of course, Notre Dame's going to be looking for those guys. So you leak out the tight end, faking a block. I mean, just so brilliant in terms of, Lincoln Riley loves to get everybody involved, but he also counts on the eyes of the defense focusing on Jordan Addison, Austin Jones, used to be Travis Dye before the injury. And then you use your tight end. And this is, just in relationship to the Utah game, we saw Josh Fallow, tight end, not like a main pass catching target, but he had a big game against Utah, and Lincoln Riley got him involved, got Michael Jackson III involved against Utah. It's going to be interesting to see how Lincoln Riley distributes the ball coming up against the Utes. But larger point is just when you have Lincoln Riley and his concepts and the way he is able to get defenses off the scent, off the hunt, and you have that natural gifted ability that Caleb Williams has, it was always going to be a rock star marriage. It was always going to be a box office spectacular. Just the worry going into the season, of course, was the defense. And, it's still a very, very leaky secondary. But, we talked about the horrible run defense in the first 6 weeks of the season and how bad the run fits were and, how much USC was getting gashed. And that's been fixed. It's now the secondary. The secondary was fine in the first 6 games. And now that's the sieve on this defense. But Alex Grinch has done a great job of plugging up this run defense. Zach Charbonnet didn't go off against UCLA. And the big worry against Notre Dame was, the Irish grinding the clock, 8-minute drives, keeping the ball away from Caleb Williams. Didn't happen. Time of possession went to USC big, 35-23 or 35-23 to 24-37, basically 10 and a half minutes in favor of USC. And the run pass mix, USC 39 runs, 22 passes, man. So for all the USC fans who wondered if Lincoln Riley would lean on the running game and it would embrace the old student body right tradition that's part of the old style USC culture. This was your night. So a lot of old time Trojan fans I know not only reveled in the win over Notre Dame and not only reveled in the first sweep of UCLA and Notre Dame since 2016 under Sam Darnold, they reveled in the way this was done with the run and with 5-minute clock chewing drives in the fourth quarter to just shrink the margins for Notre Dame and prevent the Irish from having a real foothold late in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, certainly we went into this one knowing where USC's advantages lay, but for them to be the more physical team and to really hold up against the Notre Dame ground attack, and then for Austin Jones and that offensive line really to be a battering ram in the fourth quarter in particular was quite impressive when a team can go to different components to lean on and not just be a one-trick pony that it's all Caleb Williams and a bunch of elite receivers.
No doubt. I mean, and the fact that USC showed a different way of winning, this wasn't Star Wars. I mean, Caleb Williams made highlight level plays, but those were more improvisational plays. There were a few scripted plays like the Lake McCree one that I mentioned, and Taj Washington made a particularly spectacular catch in traffic. But this was more about pounding the rock and asserting superiority up front with an offensive line that continues to do its job. There is a point of concern that Andrew Voorhees left this game in the second half. Going to be interesting to see how he is. This is a short week. And I see, Tim Prangley, our friend and collaborator, and, I joined him and Tony Altamore and Rick Anaya for the post-game show on Saturday, which was great as always. I know I see Tim in the comments, saying, this line of, USC favored by just 1.5 points. It's odd. I think it comes from UCLA and Notre Dame were very draining games. Like those were big, high-level games, and now you have a short week. True. And you have to come right back. And Utah just played Colorado. And what did we say about USC UCLA on the 19th? USC played Colorado the week before. Perfect lead-in for that game. You could essentially just start game planning for UCLA right after playing Cal on November 5th. You don't have to do film study for Colorado. Basically, it's a 2-week ramp up for preparation. So Utah has that same benefit. When Utah finished with Oregon, obviously it didn't expect to be in the Pac-12 title game, but it knew that USC would be the opponent if it got there. So I'm sure that Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley and Andy Ludwig, they all started looking at USC film after the Oregon game because they didn't have to study intensely for Colorado. They could look at USC if they got there. And thanks to Oregon State and an epic duck meltdown, they did get there. So Utah did not have to overextend itself last week. And I think that's a big piece of why this Vegas line is as small as it is. I know that Utah's banged up, and that's why a lot of USC fans think that, hey, this game is ours to win. And I understand that. But that is the one big advantage Utah does have. Utah just played Colorado, was able to kind of mentally coast into this game. And now Utah can gear up, make this its second Super Bowl of the season, just like the first one against USC, whereas the Trojans have just finished the UCLA Notre Dame double stack. And that's emotionally involving. And maybe, the Trojans are just a little bit flat in this game. That's a very realistic possibility. And that's why I'm not, super confident about this game. I realize that it sets up well for USC on a lot of levels, but the short week and Utah having played Colorado, that should definitely be a concern for Trojan fans.
I'm in the process of putting together a series of statistics that not only match up USC and Utah, and I'd love to get your perspective on the first matchup and what went right, what went wrong, and we know the officiating in particular, but the other, I think it's 7 matchups of common opponents, and obviously some of them are much more meaningful, UCLA in particular, than others. But the Colorado game, looking at what Utah was able to do against Colorado, my goodness, they had a 477-yard advantage in that game. You rarely see anything like that. They had 20 more first downs than Colorado in that game. yeah, they basically had just a layup in preparation for USC. So that's a great point that you make in regards to the odds makers' perspective on this game, coming off two daunting games for USC and the short week. So, Ben, we appreciate your contribution here. USC and Michigan have recently faced similar criticisms from other fan bases and media. Now look at us, fight on, and go blue.
Well, so USC and Michigan being brought up together in the same conversation, it allows for this particular point, and that is that, if TCU loses in the Big 12 championship game and USC can win the night before on Friday, then that means, assuming that Michigan beats Purdue, which, very, very likely to happen. If TCU loses and USC wins, what do we get? We get a USC-Michigan Fiesta Bowl in the semifinals. So it'd basically be Rose Bowl East, the Rose Bowl, but played in Arizona instead of California. And that's really important, I think, just if we're going to game out some playoff scenarios, which is obviously going to be a component of this show here on the Voice of College Football. And that is that it makes a big difference whether USC goes to the Fiesta Bowl or the Peach Bowl. And you look at this through the prism of, hey, not USC, but Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley got absolutely demolished in the Peach Bowl semifinal in 2019 when he had to play LSU in Atlanta. LSU bringing a lot of fans there, SEC country. It was a road game for Oklahoma. Whereas when he brought Oklahoma to the 2018 Rose Bowl, the 2017 season, his Oklahoma team outplayed Georgia most of the way. But a few foolish decisions, and then when Lincoln Riley chickened out on 4th and half a yard from the Georgia 15.5-yard line in overtime, not trusting his elite offensive line against the Georgia defense and instead kicking a field goal. Like, that's the worst in-game decision Lincoln Riley has made in his entire career, and he paid for it, losing to the Dogs in overtime. But Oklahoma was outplaying Georgia most of the way, and that was a very comfortable environment for Riley and his offense against Kirby Smart. So just compare a West Coast playoff semifinal versus an East Coast playoff semifinal. That difference between Fiesta Bowl and Peach, if USC is able to get to the playoff, that matters a lot, as does being able to play Michigan instead of Georgia. Now, some people will say, well, hey, Michigan showed just how great it was against Ohio State. I think that game's more about how weak Ohio State is, because Ohio State had to hear all year long, how soft it was, how Michigan shoved the Buckeyes around, how Michigan punched Ohio State in the teeth. And then that's the effort Ohio State serves up. That's how Ohio State responds. That's how Jim Knowles replaces Kerry Combs at defensive coordinator. I mean, Michigan did what it had to do, and full credit to the Wolverines. And I'm definitely not trying to diminish what they accomplished, because beating Ohio State back-to-back, doing it in Columbus, Harbaugh going all in on, his new philosophy and just nailing it, that is a tremendous accomplishment, no question. But let's just look at the way the touchdowns were scored for Michigan in the process of getting that 24-20 lead, before it dominated the last 10 minutes. Those touchdowns were easy peasy. They were complete breakdowns by Ohio State. It's not as though it was a great Ohio State defense and greater Michigan offense, this battle of elites and, just one team managing to rise above the other. No, this was Ohio State stepping on a rake. This was Ohio State slipping on a banana peel. This was the safety just getting spun around on a coverage and letting a guy run free 20 yards open. So it's just the way it happened, right? It's not so much that Michigan scored. It's that Ohio State made these very, very large and very elemental mistakes. So that doesn't mean Michigan's a fraud, all right? I'm not saying that. But it wasn't like classic domination where Michigan took Ohio State's best punch and simply rose above. That's not the game that played out in Columbus. It was more about Ohio State, with all this athleticism and so much to prove, laying an egg and being very sloppy and very disorganized, and Michigan taking advantage of it. So, credit to the Wolverines for taking advantage of it, making the most of their opportunity. But Ohio State played an atrocious football game. It really brought to mind, Mark, how Ohio State played Oregon early in the 2021 season in terms of being disorganized, sloppy, disjointed, looking like a terribly coached team, just not having a lot of cohesion, not having a lot of force, not having a lot of purpose in what it did and how it went about its business. And Michigan is that team with purpose. So like credit the Wolverines, but I think that there's a wide gulf between Michigan and Georgia still. Like there was a wide gulf last year. Obviously, Georgia had a much better team last year than it does this year. This year's Georgia team has been a little more creaky, a little more wobbly. But I still think that if you get Georgia and Michigan on the same field, there's a big difference between the two teams. So I think that if USC can get Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, that is a very winnable matchup for USC. I think that USC has the culture and the toughness that Ohio State, with similar Cadillac talent and similar speed on the edges, lacked. I think that USC is like Ohio State, but with toughness. And I think that would not be a favorable matchup for Michigan. So it all comes back to, and this is another storyline to talk about here. So a few weeks ago, it seemed that Garrett Riley, younger brother of Lincoln Riley, might keep his older brother from the playoff. Well, now that's different. Now it's, are they both going to make the playoff? And you know, if Garrett Riley and TCU do lose, again, by shoving USC up into that Fiesta Bowl slot against Michigan, that could enable USC and Lincoln Riley to make their first college football playoff national championship game. You know, Lincoln Riley 0-4 in the playoff overall, 0-3 as a head coach, but 0-4 when you include 2015 against Clemson in that season's Orange Bowl semifinal. So Garrett Riley might have to lose in order for Lincoln Riley to make his first college football playoff national championship game. And you have the delicious scenario of the Riley family and Lincoln's and Garrett's parents, Marilyn and Mike. They're going to watch Lincoln Friday night with USC, and then they're going to get up early Saturday morning and watch that TCU Kansas State game, which is a noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific kick. So it's going to be 20 remarkable hours, Friday night through early Saturday afternoon, for the Riley family, a journey unlike any other. That's a fascinating storyline for Conference Championship Week.
So who would have thought a year or two ago that the statement could be legitimately made that USC is Ohio State plus toughness?
Seriously.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, as you well know, Matt, when we do our team channel shows here, we tend, because of our broad scope and because we cover so many teams and so forth, is we have a little bit less of a centric crowd during these team channel shows. And therefore, we've got a lot of Ohio State and Michigan fans that are taking umbrage with your statements about either one. We even have Michigan fans taking up for Ohio State, if you can believe that. But you've
I don't know how you can take up for Ohio State after that display.
Well, I would say this, that I agree with you that Georgia's probably not as good. That I believe that remains to be seen. I want to see them play an elite team, but the closest we've seen is Oregon/Tennessee, one of those two. But it's just reasonable to think that they're not quite the defensive presence that they were last year, because that was one of the great defenses we've ever seen. As opposed to, they probably still have the best defense in the country, but it's just not quite as airtight. And, their offense is a little bit more, to use your term, wobbly than it was last year. I do think that Michigan's better this year with J.J. McCarthy, and I think that their offensive approach is much better as well. It's more diversified.
It's hard for me to get past that Illinois game, though. Like Michigan played very poorly in what was a high stakes game and needed some bad coaching from Brett Bielema to get through that game. Illinois was marching with the short lead in the fourth quarter, and Bielema throws that long pass on first down instead of sticking with the short passes, which were working. Like, he made some specific tactical decisions that got Illinois behind schedule on that drive. and enabled Michigan to be within reach with a Jake Moody field goal at the end of that game. I mean, Michigan's passing game looked bad in that game. Receivers were dropping passes. McCarthy had some really easy throws that he was missing. And I go back to the point about Ohio State. And so for Michigan and Ohio State fans who are getting angry, like, it's not as though McCarthy made these incredible plays. No, these were basic throws to wide open receivers. And he threw an 8-yard out where the corner misses the tackle. And because Ohio State is blitzing for God knows why, like, you don't blitz struggling quarterbacks. Like, you make struggling quarterbacks slowly work the ball down the field. You make a struggling quarterback engineer that 13-play, 80-yard drive. You blitz the elite quarterbacks. You don't blitz the bad ones. And so Jim Knowles, like, I don't know where his tactical approach came from, but like, as soon as that tackle was missed on that 8-yard out, it was a Michigan touchdown. And so Ohio State handed Michigan some pretty easy touchdowns. And so, like, we all know we all know what a great play is. We all know what a next level play is. And JJ McCarthy did what he was supposed to do. So credit to him. Like, he stepped up big in a big game. Like, he deserves a heck of a lot of praise, but let's not get it twisted. Let's not say that, like, he made these amazing jaw-dropping plays. No, that's Caleb Williams. And so that reinforces the idea that if it's USC and Michigan, like that, I'm not sweating bullets if I'm a USC fan in that game. Like, I'm like, Michigan's a worthy test, and that's not going to be an easy game, but I'm certainly not going in thinking, oh, Michigan has the clear upper hand. Let's just put it that way. Whereas if it's USC Georgia in the Peach Bowl, Georgia with a month to prepare, that's a freight train heading USC's way. And I think the Trojans get steamrolled. So, like, it's not as though I think the Trojans are fine no matter what. I really see a difference between Michigan and Georgia. Let's keep this in mind about, both Kirby Smart and Nick Saban in the playoff. You give them a month to prepare, and you give those guys a month off to rest, recharge, gather. We've seen some creaky Alabama teams under Nick Saban. Like, last year's a really good example against Luke Fickell, who's now on his way to Wisconsin. That Alabama team limped into the playoff semifinal against Cincinnati. It was that Alabama team last year trailed Auburn 10-3 in the final minute. So they scored just 3 points in the first 59 minutes against Auburn. Had some other games where, just barely got by. But then you give that Saban team a month off to gather, regroup. They were physically dominant against Cincinnati in that semifinal. Now, you could say Cincinnati, group of five, not really the same as a Michigan or another team, but like Kirby Smart in Georgia, really, they decisively hammered Michigan in a game that was never particularly close last year too. So I'm thinking that, for all of Georgia's inconsistencies, scoring just 16 points against Kentucky, giving up 22 to Kent State, barely scraping by against Missouri. Georgia's had its wobbly moments this year, no question about it. But I think that with a month off, Georgia's going to come at whoever is its semifinal opponent just like a freight train, and it's going to be in Atlanta. So that's a Georgia home game. So for Michigan fans who are upset or who think that I'm really, diminishing the Wolverines, it's partly just a comparison relative to, playing Michigan in Glendale versus playing Georgia in Atlanta. Like, if you can't admit that those are two vastly different scenarios and two vastly different situations, I don't know what else to tell you, because, hey, Michigan's doing a great job as a program. Harbaugh has not just righted the ship, but he has kind of reinforced the extent to which he's righted the ship by beating Ryan Day twice and doing so in Columbus. Like, it's a king-sized conquest for Harbaugh, and he deserves rich congratulations and praise for that. But in terms of winning a playoff semifinal, that is what Harbaugh has yet to do. It's also what Lincoln Riley has yet to do. It's part of what would make a Michigan USC semifinal so delicious. But like, let's not put Michigan and Georgia on the same plane, because Kirby Smart's been there, done that. He's won some playoff semifinals. He's been to the top. He won the national title last year. Harbaugh, as great as he is, and he's certainly reaffirmed his greatness each of these past 2 seasons, Smart sets the bar higher, and he deserves that benefit of the doubt. and Michigan playing in Glendale, like that's not like basically a home game for Michigan. Whereas Georgia playing in Atlanta, that is basically a home game for the Dogs. So there's a lot of ways in which Georgia and Michigan should be differentiated, not just in terms of their inherent resources, but where they're going to be playing. Glendale, Atlanta, it's two very different situations, and people need to realize that.
I am just sitting back here having a good time watching these comments and then listening to Matt just certainly go through the various scenarios and the various counter punches that he has. D, for some reason, is on here every week, just thinks that I have it out for USC football for some unknown reason. But anyway, that is not going to... The team that I predict to win on Friday is not going to be revealing any kind of allegiance. That's not how I predict games. They're not based on rooting interest. Okay. All right. I will ask you this, Matt, before we focus on the matchup against Utah as we stay on this playoff run here. If TCU does lose, do you think that they're going to maintain their position, or do you think that opens the door for Ohio State or maybe Alabama?
Well, we have talked about this, Mark, on previous episodes. And for everyone who's watching here on the Voice of College Football, go back to 2014, go back to the first year of the playoff and what happened, right? We all remember what happened in 2014 when TCU crushed Iowa State, much as it did this year, and yet still got jumped by Ohio State. So, and this is where we get into with the playoff. We have a political and economic side, a television side, an entertainment side, and we get raw merit and what the actual resumes are. Now, so I want to be very clear. If TCU loses and is 12-1, with its only loss being to a good Kansas State team, I think that on merit, TCU should be in. Okay, so that's the merit side. But I think in terms of the economics and ESPN running the show, and this being an entertainment business and wanting the sexy TV matchup, I think that Alabama or Ohio State get in over TCU if just the Horned Frogs lose. Now, we're going to have a real mess if TCU and USC both lose. And you could have Alabama and Ohio State getting in over USC and TCU. Now, that would be outrageous in terms of merit, right? In terms of resumes. But in terms of the economics and ESPN running the show, it should not be surprising to anyone, okay? Like, let's just think about what the better television decision is for ESPN in terms of getting a competitive game, which leads to the higher ratings, which leads to more buzz, more publicity. And this is why I think that Alabama is not eliminated from this. This is why I think Alabama has a decent chance if both TCU and USC lose. And that is, and I'm going to use the historical comparison here. In 2017, Alabama got in over Ohio State, even though Ohio State was a conference champion and Alabama was not. And the reason that decision was made, like no one's gone on the record about it, but like no one's ever going to say it. The people in charge are not going to say it this bluntly, but you're not going to convince me otherwise. All right. The previous year, 2016, Clemson 31, Ohio State nothing in the Fiesta Bowl playoff semifinal. So Alabama got in over Ohio State in 2017. And this is not facts, but it's my strongly held opinion because of what happened to Ohio State against Clemson in 2016. You had a non-competitive game, so ESPN wanted to have Alabama-Clemson as the semifinal in 2017 in the Sugar Bowl because it would make for a better TV product. It would fetch a better television rating. So as the comparison, you put Ohio State against Georgia in the Peach Bowl, or you put Alabama against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. And because Alabama and Georgia didn't play during the regular season, it's not a rematch. So all SEC, that might rankle some people, of course, but it's not a rematch. So it becomes a little bit more palatable in that way. That's why I think that if TCU and USC both lose and we get a 4-team jumble for those last two spots, that's why I think Alabama still has a very legitimate chance because it has the bigger television draw, and Ohio State getting bombed by Michigan, not just losing, but getting bombed by 22 points, that could be the boomerang that hurts the Buckeyes. And there would be irony in this, that Ohio State did need to beat Wisconsin as badly as it did in 2014 to get in. If Ohio State wins that game by 3 points, maybe not. Like, Ohio State might still have gotten in, but it wouldn't have been quite as easy for the committee to explain that first year. But like Ohio State's unexpectedly big win in 2014, now you have this unexpectedly large loss for Ohio State 8 years later, and that could vault Alabama over the Buckeyes. Again, not on merit, but in terms of what ESPN wants, in terms of the bigger TV rating, the better entertainment spectacle for the playoff semifinals.
I would think that if ESPN's making that decision based on a political move, i.e. dollars and TV ratings, that's also tied to the SEC being in bed with ESPN, because going forward, of course, the Big Ten will not be part of the ESPN contract, because if you're just basing it on TV popularity, it can be easily argued that Ohio State's the biggest draw in the sport.
Sure. But that
rating against
SEC
Michigan
versus Big Ten angle, and the fact that those two conferences are so fully associated with one network or the other, that is an excellent supporting point to make.
Folks, that Ohio State Michigan rating was larger than a World Series, Stanley Cup, or NBA Finals rating, the largest college football rating regular season in 11 seasons. And last year's was by far the largest, was 40% higher than the number 2 game. A lot of people watch Ohio State, Michigan play. There's no question about that. And we're only 2 years away from getting USC and UCLA in that mix. And we're going to see some titanic numbers and matchups. It'll be jaw-dropping.
All right. We have a USC-Utah Pac-12 championship game to preview, but there's one other story I wanted to hit on. I mentioned the Riley brothers and USC and TCU and that storyline. The other one is, with Alex Grinch. Now, I'm on board. I mean, I'm on record as saying Alex Grinch should not be fired. He should be retained for next year at USC. Give him more talent. Go into the transfer portal. Go onto the recruiting trail and give Alex Grinch more talent so that you can see conclusively what he can do with more resources, more overall bodies and depth and quality on defense. But I did say in my writings at Trojans Wire when addressing this subject in recent weeks that if the workings of the coaching carousel, if the plot twists in the carousel opened up an opportunity for USC to get an upgrade at defensive coordinator, the Trojans should pursue that, right? You want the best. You should go for the best. If the best is available, you go for it. Like, there's no law saying that Lincoln Riley has to stay with Alex Grinch as though it's some kind of marriage contract, all right? If there's an upgrade, USC should go for it. So I wrote at Trojans Wire on Monday, and it's one of our most read stories of the year, interestingly enough. It's funny how things work that way. The Green Bay Packers are now the favorite, I would say, to land Jim Leonard. Now that, Wisconsin jilted him, left him at the altar for Luke Fickell, the industry speculation has been for a long time that if Leonard didn't get the Wisconsin head coaching job, the other job he really, really wanted, Packers defensive coordinator. And the Packers have a bad defensive coordinator right now. They're not going to make the playoffs. So one would think that, they're going to want to make a move for Jim Leonard. But since Leonard's not at Wisconsin, he's a free agent right now, Mike Bone, who, made this ninja move exactly 1 year ago today, November 28th, 2021, exactly 1 year ago today when he hired Lincoln Riley to USC in a move no one saw coming. Can Mike Bone, the stealth ninja, make a move with Jim Leonard's agent and make Jim Leonard the new defensive coordinator at USC? Like, I'm not saying this is likely, just as Lincoln Riley to USC wasn't likely. And I laughed at the notion that Lincoln Riley would come to USC, on the morning that Bruce Feldman said that USC is going to take a swing at it. I laughed it off, but that was before we've seen these unconventional coaching decisions, such as Riley leaving Oklahoma for USC, such as Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame for LSU. And now Luke Fickell, who seemed to be a guy who wanted just one of two jobs, Notre Dame or Ohio State. And he was holding out, playing the long game for those jobs, much as like Brent Venables played the long game and waiting for his chance to be the coach at Oklahoma. it seemed as though in terms of industry expectations that Fickell wanted just one of two jobs. If he was going to leave Cincinnati, it was just going to be for the Irish or the Buckeyes. And Ryan Day is now on much weaker footing than before. So even more reason for Fickell to wait and see if the Ohio State job comes open in 1 or 2 years. Like, that is an intense focus of industry speculation right now. So Fickell to Wisconsin, I'm not saying it's a bad move for Fickell, but it's unconventional and it was entirely unexpected. Like, no one predicted this. No one saw this coming. So if we entertain the idea of Jim Leonhard going to USC, the logical, natural response is, what? That move doesn't make sense for Jim Leonhard. That's not what he's been thinking about. That's not what he's had his eye on. Well, Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly, Luke Fickell, they all made the same kinds of moves that defied all the conventional wisdom, all the industry expectations. So Mike Bohn made one unconventional and spectacular move with Lincoln Riley. If Jim Leonhard is willing to listen, then that is the kind of opening where, hey, Alex Grinch, you did a good job this year. Thank you for your service, but we need an upgrade because USC is only about getting the best. So that is a plot point that I wanted to include in our show tonight.
Great stuff tonight from Matt Zemek. As always, that's not an aberration by any stretch. Matt delivers each and every week here at the Voice of College Football on our USC show, but he delivers each and every day at Trojans Wire. So get on over to Trojans Wire, and especially this week with the Pac-12 championship and a college football playoff berth on the line. Matt, anything in particular that people should be looking out for?
I think a starting point is that this is a different Utah team than what we saw in mid-October. More injured. Also, Tavion Thomas left the team. And our friend Larry Pilgrim on the USC postgame show here on the Voice of College Football on Saturday, he's the Utah expert. He checks in. He provides really helpful commentary and insight into the Utah program. So he pointed out that Tavion Thomas has left the Utah team, so he's not going to be available at running back. Dalton Kincaid's going to play. So he had a slight injury against Colorado, but he's going to play. Obviously, the 16 catches for 234 yards. So USC is going to be mindful of being able to contain him. But Utah also has Van Fillinger out. He's their pass rusher. He played in the October 15 game, but subsequently got injured. So this is a thinner Utah team. It's a thinner team on the defensive front. So you'd have to think, especially if Andrew Voorhees is reasonably healthy. And again, we don't know exactly how healthy he is, but if Voorhees can be reasonably healthy, USC has pretty much its main offensive line starters intact. USC should feel relatively confident about being able to keep the Utah pass rush away from Caleb Williams, and he should be able to survey the field and get matchups that he wants. So USC's offense should be relatively comfortable against Utah, much as it was in the first meeting. So it comes down to, can Cam Rising do it again? Can Cam Rising play the same elite level game and throwing to Dalton Kincaid that he displayed in the first game? Because with no Tavion Thomas, I don't think Utah can sledgehammer the ball. And because USC has been better at taking away the run, this is a game where Utah has to make the same plays in the passing game that it did on October 15th. And one of the plot complications for Utah is Cam Rising, in Rice-Eccles Stadium, he's magic. But in road games, especially the one at Oregon, also the week 1 at Florida, wasn't on top of his game. So can Cam Rising not only replicate what he did against USC, but can he play an elite game away from Salt Lake City? That is another subplot involving Cam Rising, and that really is the center of the game. If Cam Rising does not play a great game, USC is going to have to make some significant mistakes. Like Caleb Williams is going to need to commit a few turnovers. Austin Jones is going to need to cough up a fumble. USC is going to need to get a punt blocked, which it avoided against Notre Dame because Caleb Williams pooch punted. That was a great move by Lincoln Riley to pooch punt so that you don't have your punt protection team against Notre Dame's Special Forces elite punt block unit. So if USC will probably have to give away points on special teams, give away turnovers in order to lose if Cam Rising is not at his best. So this is a quarterback-centric game, especially from the Utah side of the divide.
I was just about to post the box score from that October meeting, but regardless, yeah, it's a fascinating matchup, in Utah going for another Pac-12 championship after breaking through after a couple title game losses in recent years, breaking through, of course, last season. All right. The rushing attack with Travis Dye out and Austin Jones stepping up, he's obviously proven to be ready for the task. And 154 yards on the ground against a sturdy Notre Dame defense, kind of that was probably worn out from chasing Caleb Williams around. And one of the offshoots to Caleb Williams is not just watching the spectacular plays, but they get behind the sticks a number of times against Notre Dame. And those defenders have to be, in addition to being physically worn out, just demoralized from chasing him all over the place. And we're not talking about, Rice's defense. We're talking about elite athletes on the other side who think that they have a quarterback hemmed in, and he, tosses one downfield after dodging 18 guys and completes a 22-yard pass. It's just the number of times that they had them behind the sticks and he was able to bail them out was just remarkable. And again, has to be demoralizing.
It is. And leading into this Utah game, one thing that I'm going to be looking for is, does Utah just sit back in coverage? Does Utah just play a game where, hey, we're going to let you throw passes, but, it's all going to be short stuff. And that's how the Bengals beat the Chiefs, by the way, in the AFC Championship game. In the second half, they were just sitting back with 7 or 8 guys, and you're not throwing over the top. You're not going to get the big play against us. You have to dump it off. You have to check it down. And if you can do it the whole way and get a touchdown out of it, great. But you're going to have a tough time scoring 7 where, we're going to give you yards underneath, but you're going to have to settle for a lot of field goals unless you can solve us in the red zone. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley treat Caleb Williams. Because if they try to blitz him, first off, will they be able to get there? But second, Jordan Addison's healthy again. Mario Williams is healthy again. He didn't make huge plays against Notre Dame, but he looked, faster, more like his normal self. You are seeing some USC guys getting healthier just at the right time. If you do blitz Caleb Williams, it does leave Jordan Addison and Mario Williams, also Taj Washington, Kyle Ford on an island. And if there's one position group where USC is deep and elite, it's wide receiver. That's where USC has both the depth and the quality. We've been seeing it the past several weeks when Addison and Mario Williams were out. Washington, Ford, Michael Jackson, all stepping up and making significant plays. So, will Utah even entertain the notion of, trying to chase Caleb Williams in the pocket, or because it's so thin on that defensive line, does Kyle Whittingham just go to a game plan where, we're not even going to chase you. We're just going to sit back, park the bus, use a World Cup soccer term. And you're just going to have to dink and dunk it the whole night. And we're just going to try to hold you to 7 field goals instead of 7 touchdowns. And we're going to try to just, we're going to try to make you field goal yourself to death. And just refuse to give up the big play. It's just going to be interesting to see how Utah approaches Caleb Williams.
Our guy Remick Johnson makes the comment about Cam Rising not being 100%. I don't think anyone in the world saw the Colorado game, but the week before they took on Oregon, and he wasn't just not 100%. He was noticeably in pain, noticeably not being able to get the throws downfield the way he normally would. It was noticeable, the compromise in play for Cam Rising at least 2 weeks ago.
That's true. And it goes back to him being injured in the Washington State game, not even playing in that game, which really took a lot of people by surprise, myself included, because Utah had 12 days off after the USC game on October 15th. And, so going back to that October 27th Thursday night game against Washington State, it was determined just hours before the game that Rising wasn't going to play. It's not as though he was ruled out, 1 or 2 days earlier he was just ruled out right before the game. Oh, he didn't feel well. So like that ambushed a lot of people in terms of their expectations of whether Rising would play. It ambushed a lot of people in terms of their awareness of how healthy, not healthy Rising actually was. So he's been kind of battling through it. But I do go back to the point where, like USC should not, USC needs to prepare to face Cam Rising's best. He might not play his best, but as a coach, you always prepare to take the opponent's best punch. And I go back to the Colorado factor that Utah was able to just play basically what amounted to a glorified scrimmage against Colorado. So if Cam Rising's been hurt, and he is not 100%, but he just has to play one more great game for USC to lose. And that's why he should have USC's full respect and attention on Friday.
All right. As Tim points out here, make sure you check out Matt's work on Trojans Wire. The link is in the chat. Each day there's extensive coverage of USC football, and this is the time to jump on board if you haven't already, with, of course, as we head toward a Pac-12 championship game, a college football playoff selection, and head into December. All right, Matt, is there anything else you wanted to hit on?
I mean, we've pretty much exhausted it. I would just say for the USC fans in the crowd that, hey, because this is a Friday game, like it's not as though USC has to do any scoreboard watching. I mean, obviously USC's winning in anyway, but like you don't have the distraction of having any other games going on. So, we've laid out the various playoff scenarios and what ifs at Trojans Wire. But we're definitely not going to write a single word about previewing any playoff game, because we're focused on Utah. We're expecting Utah to give it all it has. We're not like taking anything for granted. I return to the fact that the Pac-12 title game has often eliminated a title game hopeful. This final month of the season, you see Pac-12 teams each year get close and then they get knocked out. They get bumped off the hunt. So, like with that history in mind, and also knowing that the limitations that still exist on this defense, again, no one should be taking this for granted. If you're USC, I'm definitely not. We'll have Saturday to talk about playoff scenarios if USC is able to get past this tough challenge from Utah. But like you're just going to get a focus on the Utah game coming up this week. Also, there is the plot point that the folks in Seattle are going to be rooting very hard for the Trojans. You don't see that very often. Seattle fans rooting really hard for a Los Angeles sports team. But if USC wins and does go to the playoff, that's going to elevate the Washington Huskies to the Rose Bowl. And it's something that's happened a few times before. 1977, that was Don James' first trip to the Rose Bowl against Michigan with Warren Moon, a guy you might remember at quarterback. USC had to knock off UCLA on a Frank Jordan field goal at the very end to win that game. And then 4 years later in 1981, it was UCLA not making a field goal. It was George Achika of USC, the nose guard, blocking future NFL star Norm Johnson on a 46-yard kick. And so that sent USC to a 22-21 win, which sent another Don James team and Jacques Robinson to the 1982 Rose Bowl, where Hayden Fry made his first Rose Bowl with the Iowa Hawkeyes, Washington beating Iowa in that 82 Rose Bowl. That was thanks to good old USC. So once again, the Washington Huskies are counting on USC to send the Dogs to the Rose Bowl. So Seattle's going to be supporting the Trojans this Friday night.
Yeah, the Huskies shut out the Hawkeyes in that Rose Bowl. And if I remember correctly, not quite as high of a status quarterback, but one Tom Flick, the starting quarterback for the Washington Huskies in that one against the Hawkeyes.
And there was a future legendary coach on that 1981 Iowa team, a guy named Bob Stoops.
After playing for the Hawkeyes. Absolutely. All right. Great stuff, as always, from Matt Zemek. I always appreciate and enjoy this hour with Matt because it allows me to kick back as I take calls and do live streams all week and have to be the answer. It's fun to kick back and listen to Matt answer the questions and deliver. And I learn a lot about USC football and college football in general and the Pac-12. And it's always a great ride with Matt. We've done this now for 30 consecutive weeks, and we appreciate everybody being here. We had a great crowd in tonight, close to 400 folks online. So we appreciate
Thank you,
that.
everyone.
Absolutely. And can you imagine we could have even more if you folks get out there, grab a few more people next week as we recap the Pac-12 championship game and hopefully look forward to a playoff bid or whatever the postseason holds for USC.
Big pressure, but that's what we live for. As Billie Jean King said, pressure is a privilege. It certainly is. Like this is what you want to be. You want to be in this place. You don't want to be 4-8, which is where USC was exactly a year ago at this time.
When Matt and I first got together to record clips, Matt would make, and I would say the same thing. I'd be like, you know what, Matt, I've always had my pulse on USC football as I try to, navigate all the major brands. But, I've lost track of this USC team because I'm just not watching them play, a 2-score game against Colorado, on a Saturday night. It's just not going to happen.
On Pac-12 Network.
Yeah. It was just the most invisible USC season in the history of the program, at least in modern days.
Yep, the most invisible USC season since 1959 under Don Clark.
Great stuff. Matt, we always appreciate it. Thank you so much for all that you do here at the Voice of College Football. And again, you see the link right there. Tim has left it in the chat. Follow Matt's work at Trojans Wire all week.
Thank you. And hey, we'll see where we are next Monday night. Could be in a very special place, but hey, the worst case scenario is a New Year's Six Bowl. And imagine USC being in this place 3 months ago. Every USC fan would have taken it. So even if it doesn't work out perfectly, the worst landing spot is the Cotton Bowl. And that's still a great place to be for USC. See you all back here next week. Bring a friend and we'll do it again next Monday night.